Today I am in the Tifton, Georgia area, and this story today, well, despite the fact that I had never heard of this story before, apparently it brought a lot of immediate attention here to this area. It's crazy and it's brutal, and well, in the last few years since I started telling true crime stories, I can't remember any other story like this one that we're going to be talking about today. It's just that heartbreaking and that tragic, and it's probably one of the worst stories that I've ever told. Now, I've been preparing to make this one for quite some time now, so I do have all of the crime scene photos. I have recorded polygraph tests and recorded interrogations that I'm going to show you. Plus, as usual, we're going to be going to the locations where the story took place, and you're not going to believe what happened here. Today, I'm going to be telling the story of the murder of Sunday Blombergh by her own in-laws, of all people. And then in the days that follow after this, I'll be releasing the full and never before seen interrogations and polygraph tests, etc., all surrounding this horrible, horrible story. This is the murder of Sunday Blombergh. Now, 28-year-old Sunday Blombergh, she was a beautiful woman. She always looked at the positive side of everything, and everyone loved her. Sunday grew up in Tallahassee, Florida, with her parents and her sister, Sunshine. Sunday was a good child mostly. She never really gave her parents much concern. That is until she got out of high school. Once she graduated, Sunday started dabbling with drugs, and she started hanging out with the wrong people. Every night she was either at a club or a party somewhere, going wild and out. All of that would change though in the early 2000s when Sunday met and fell in love with a man named Theo Connolly. Theo and his family lived here where I am in Tifton, Georgia, and apparently Theo and Sunday had a mutual acquaintance because he was down in Tallahassee at a party, and coincidentally Sunday and a few of her friends were at that same party, and the two of them crossed paths and they started talking. Sunday became smitten with Theo almost instantly, and vice versa. After that party, Sunday and Theo talked every day, and they drove back and forth to see each other, and for a while they were inseparable. 2 years later, Theo and Sunday are still together and they're still a couple when they find out that they're going to be parents. 9 months later, they have a baby girl and they name her Isabella. All three of them, Theo, Sunday, Isabella, they all move into their own home right down the street here, which is right down the street from Theo's parents. For 7 long years, they lived together as a happy family, and Sunday had gotten close with Theo's family, Herman and Ruby Evans. Herman owned his own trucking business, so he was going several days a week delivering truckloads. And then they owned a flower shop in downtown Tifton that Ruby was in charge of, and everyone in the family helped out in the flower shop whenever they could, including Sunday and Isabella. Everyone worked at this flower shop. It was like it was one big family unit. Sunday was happy and she was content with her life. She loved having her little family. But one day out of the blue, things would change. Sunday began to suspect that Theo was cheating on her. He would start walking away from her and be very secretive when he was talking on the phone. He would hide his screen and turn away while he was texting. And later on, he started leaving for the weekends on business trips where he would leave on a Friday afternoon and he wouldn't come back until late Sunday evening. Once Sunday began to suspect that Theo was cheating, she waited for him to leave on one of his business trips, and she got in the car and she followed him. Unfortunately for Sunday, her intuition was right, but it was much, much worse than she suspected. Sunday followed Theo, and he left their home in Tifton, and to Sunday's surprise, he drove down to her hometown of Tallahassee, Florida. Now, Theo had no clue that Sunday was behind him, and she was watching his every move. And Sunday watched as Theo pulled up to a familiar house that Sunday knew. He walked up, and he used a key and opened the door and walked right into Sunday's best friend's house. Her name was Danielle. Not only was Theo cheating on Sunday, but it was with Sunday's best friend. Now, this friend, Danielle, she was also with Sunday at that party, the same party where Sunday and Theo met. He met Danielle at the same time, and come to find out that Theo had been sleeping with Danielle on and off for the entire 7 years that Theo and Sunday were together, and Sunday had no clue. Sunday was devastated, and she got in her car and she drove back to Tifton to be with her child, questioning herself, how could he do this to me? I thought he loved me. A few days later on Sunday evening, when Theo gets home, Sunday immediately confronts him, and they get into an argument where Sunday tells Theo that he's got to leave now. She's done. Theo does just that. He goes into the room and he packs up a small bag and he leaves their home in Tifton, and he drives back down to Tallahassee, and he moves in with Sunday's former best friend, Danielle, which is pretty much where he stays for the rest of the story. After Sunday and Theo split up, Sunday calls her sister Sunshine. So you got Sunday and Sunshine, but Sunday calls her sister Sunshine, and they work it out to where once Isabella's school year is over and it's summer break, Sunshine is going to drive up to Tifton, and she's going to pick them up, and then she's going to move back down with her family to be close to people that she knows. At this point, there was still a couple of months left in the school year, so this left Sunday plenty of time to get stuff packed up and get everything in order and move. Now, Theo's parents, Herman and Ruby Evans, they told Sunday that she could come live with them in the meantime. That way they could be close with Isabella, and Sunday and Isabella weren't living alone in a house having to pay rent. Sunday agreed. Sunday had her own room inside of the Evans home, and Ruby and Herman would watch Isabella for her when she had stuff to do. A lot of people asked the Evans, wasn't it weird having Sunday living with them? Her and Theo weren't together anymore. And Herman and Ruby replied, no, Theo was down in Tallahassee with Sunday's best friend Danielle, and he never came around. And this way they would get to spend every day with Isabella. At some point, Sunday tells the Evans about her plans to move back down to Tallahassee. And this infuriated Ruby and Herman. And Ruby feared that if Sunday took Isabella down to Florida, then she was never going to get to see Isabella again. So this started a tumultuous relationship between Sunday and the Evans, just right after Sunday had moved into their home. In the weeks that followed, Ruby would try to take Isabella from Sunday. She would go to the courts, but the courts wouldn't do anything about it. So Ruby goes to Child Protective Services and tells them information that she just knew was going to get her custody of Isabella. After Sunday caught Theo cheating on her, she kicked him out and she was on her own. Well, Sunday began using drugs. She started hanging around with different people that the Evans had never met before. She began having sores pop up all over her body, and she would frequently be seen in public, and she was incoherent and could barely talk. And then sometimes she would disappear for a couple of days, where Herman and Ruby had no clue where she was. Now, Ruby used this to her advantage to try and get custody of Isabella. She went to Child Protective Services and told them that Isabella's mother was strung out on drugs, and she carries them like a bag full of syringes, and it wasn't safe for the child, Ultimately, it did not work. They did not award custody to Ruby, and to Ruby, it appeared as if Sunday was going to be leaving soon, and she was going to take Isabella with her, and Ruby was never going to get to see her again. Now, it was also about the same time that more drama would pop up in the Evans home, and Ruby Evans found out that Herman Evans had also been cheating, like father, like son. Well, he was Theo's stepfather. It turns out that Herman, while he was out on the road driving his big rig, he was going up and down the eastern coast of the United States, sleeping with any prostitute he could find. When Ruby discovered this, she sat down and talked to him. Ruby and Herman are fighting, obviously, but they managed to talk about all of it. They don't split up. They both agree to stay together and try and make it work. Now, a few weeks later, in May of 2010, Sunday's family, they started becoming worried because they couldn't get a hold of Sunday. Schools in the Tifton area were about to get out for summer break, and that was when Sunday and Sunshine had planned for Sunshine to come up and take them back down to Tallahassee. So they're trying to get a hold of Sunday to make sure the plans are finalized, and they're trying to call her on her cell phone. They tried calling the Evans, who said they hadn't seen her in a while. They did everything they could, and they had no luck getting a hold of Sunday. When Sunday's family spoke with the Evans, Herman and Ruby said that they hadn't heard from Sunday since April the 22nd. Now, this was after May. That means Sunday had been missing for more than a week at this point. By May 22nd, Ruby she knows that Sunday's family is worried. They haven't been able to get in touch with her, and she expects that they're going to call the police and report her missing. So Ruby jumps the gun. She does it. She calls law enforcement and reports Sunday missing to try to make them seem more innocent, because they were the ones who called and reported her. So Ruby was actually the one who reported Sunday missing. Officers came right here to the Evans home, and the Evans basically told police that Sunday was a drug addict, and she frequently would disappear like this, and then she would just show back up out of the blue. Well, the police here in Tifton, they deserve credit, because they did their jobs, and they didn't just chalk this up to a drug addict running off trying to score drugs. They searched for Sunday, and they continued investigating her disappearance, and they didn't stop. Obviously, the first person that law enforcement was gonna look at was Theo Connolly, Sunday's husband. The spouse is always first in any of these kind of situations. So investigators from Tifton drive down to Tallahassee, and they sit down and they talk with Theo, and he has an alibi. Theo and Danielle have not been out of each other's sight in weeks. So investigators pretty much mark Theo off the list, and they come back to Tifton to start over. During this time, search parties formed, and they started at the Evans home, and they spread out searching anywhere and everywhere they could, trying to find Sunday. And while they were searching, investigators drove back out here to the Evans home to just simply talk to the Evans and try and find out if Sunday had any enemies. While the investigators are in the Evans home, sitting in their living room, one of the investigators happens to look up on the ceiling, and he notices that there's blood splatter on the ceiling. It's just scattered there in like one little area in the middle of the living room. The detective that saw this, he doesn't say anything about it at the time. He doesn't want to alarm the Evans so that they see it and clean it up. So they wrap up their conversation with the Evans, and the detectives leave. Obviously, as soon as they get out in the car, they discuss it and they get their stuff together. And a short while later, they call Herman and Ruby, and they ask them to come back down to the police station the next day to put their timeline of when the last time they saw Sunday was on the record. The Evans agree, and the very next day they get up and they drive down to the police station for this interview. During the interview, everything starts out slow, and they're just getting Ruby and Herman to detail the last time they saw Sunday. But then about halfway through, the detectives become a little bit more aggressive, and they flat out ask Herman and Ruby if they had anything to do with Sunday's disappearance. Herman and Ruby say no, but the detectives aren't done yet. The detectives tell them about the blood splatter they saw, and they right there serve Herman and Ruby with a search warrant for their house. And they explain to them that they did it this way while the Evans were out of their home because they wanted to make sure that the Evans didn't get a chance to see it and clean it up. So while Herman and Ruby are still at the police department, officers from the Tifton Police Department, the Tift County Sheriff's Office, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, they began an extensive search of the Evans home. Now, during the search, they get the blood off of the ceiling that the detectives saw. They actually cut the blood down. They cut the ceiling. They noticed that in a few rooms, there were like a few squares of carpet that had been cut out, and new carpet had been put in its place. So they pull up all the carpet and flip it over, and they find all kind of blood underneath it. The investigators go through all of the Evans closets, and they go through their dirty clothes, and they pull out a handful of items that appear to be just completely covered in blood. One of the investigators who was searching outside of the home, right over here, they found what was a burn pile. And in that burn pile, they saw pieces of what looked like where a couch had been burned. Detectives feared that Sunday could have been burnt up in whatever fire burned up this couch, so they collected all of those ashes and they took them back for testing, but they were able to positively identify that there were no human remains in any of the ashes. By the end of the search of the Evans home, investigators knew that something bad had happened in their house. They recovered blood from all over the home, but it was going to take a little time to confirm whether or not this blood belonged to Sunday. So Herman and Ruby were allowed to leave the police station that night, and they were allowed to go back home, although I'm sure they probably told them something like, you're not allowed to leave the city or something like that. At some point, while investigators are waiting for the test results to come back from the forensics lab, they get both Ruby and Herman to come in and take a lie detector test. They pretty much flat out let them know that Herman and Ruby are their number one suspects. They need them to come take a lie detector test. And Herman and Ruby both come in, and they both fail their lie detector test miserably. Now, lie detectors, they can't be used in court, but it's cemented in the minds of the investigators that they were barking up the right tree here. Investigators continued tracking down anyone who was close with the Evans. They ran across 48-year-old Kenneth Tomlinson. Now, investigators brought Kenneth Tomlinson in for an interview, and at first he says that he doesn't know anything, but the detectives just kind of felt like Kenneth was holding something back, and they pressed him a little bit and flat out asked him, did you have anything to do with Sunday's disappearance? And Kenneth was obviously guilt-ridden, and he immediately broke down and he started telling investigators everything. Kenneth Tomlinson tells the investigators that he wasn't there for the events that he was about to tell them, what happened to Sunday Blombergh. He wasn't there for them, but that Herman had told him everything. So Kenneth proceeds to tell the investigators that Ruby and Sunday had been fighting over custody of Isabella again. Kenneth tells law enforcement that Ruby expressed that she just wished Sunday would be dead and she could take Isabella. And Kenneth tells them that this whole thing started when Ruby went to Theo and asked Theo how much would it cost to get something laced into Sunday's cocaine. Theo tells Ruby it would be about $60. And so the two of them, Theo and Ruby, drive over to Sunday's drug dealer, which is the same guy that they buy their drugs from as well. And they pay him the $60 and tell him next time Sunday comes to purchase cocaine, lace it with something, fentanyl or whatever, heroin. That way once she takes too much of it, it'll kill her. Well, a few days later, when Sunday goes to pick up some more cocaine, she goes to the dealer and she buys this batch, and the dealer laces it with whatever, and she brings it back home. Theo winds up doing that cocaine laced with probably heroin with her. So they sit down and do it together. So it turns out not to be a fatal dose for Sunday because Theo did half of it. Ruby was super mad at Theo for this, and she vowed that she would find another way to take care of it. At the same time, she had just found out that Herman had been cheating on her. So Ruby went to Herman, and Ruby told Herman that if he was a man and that if he wanted to stay with her, then he needed to kill Sunday so that Isabella could stay with them. So on the morning of April the 22nd of 2010, Herman got home from being on the road for a few days, and when he walked in to the home, Sunday was sitting on the living room couch injecting cocaine. So Herman goes back into the bedroom and he retrieves a .22 caliber pistol. He brings it back into the living room and he walks up behind Sunday and he fires one shot into the back of Sunday's head. So after Herman shoots Sunday, he leaves. He thinks that maybe if he left her there, she'll bleed out. So he grabs her cell phone off of the table and he goes and gets in his truck and he drives into town into their flower shop. Now, we know this because Ruby told law enforcement this later, but Herman goes in the flower shop and he asks Ruby, do you still want Sunday gone? Ruby says, yes, more than anything. And Herman says, it's done. So Herman, like I said, he's expecting that Sunday will bleed out and pass away while he's doing all this. Obviously, this probably took 30 minutes to an hour. But when he gets back home, unbelievably, he opens the living room door and Sunday's not on the couch anymore. So he follows a trail of blood into the bedroom where Sunday's leaned up against the bed. She looks up at him, she's bawling, crying, and she says that her legs won't work, and she begs him for help. Herman is angry now that Sunday didn't die. So Herman grabs her, like up underneath her arms. He yanks her off the couch and he drags her down the hallway into the back bedroom, where he takes a piece of wire and he wraps it around her throat, and Herman proceeds to strangle Sunday to death. Again, once he thought that he had killed her, he just kind of like drops her and he leaves the room and walks away. And then a little while later, he comes back, and yet again, unbelievably, Sunday is still alive. She's fighting for her life. So Herman, who's just absolutely beyond furious at this point, one more time, he leaves and he walks outside and goes to his truck. He gets his pocket knife out of the inside of his truck. He brings it back into the back bedroom, and he pushes it into Sunday's left breast, and it goes right into her heart, which killed Sunday Blombergh instantly. After they know for sure Sunday's dead this time, it's guaranteed, Herman kind of waits around. Ruby shows up a while later on, and they begin to try to clean up the place. There's bleach and peroxide and all kind of stuff that they're using to try to clean up the blood. Herman goes through all of his ammunition, and he takes all of the .22 ammunition that he has that matches the ammo that he used in the gun when he shot Sunday. He takes all of that matching ammunition and he rounds it all up and he drops it in a chip bag, and he goes and he throws it in the front of the truck. And then later on, he would throw that out the window on the side of the road, hoping that it would never be found. They take the throw pillows off of the couch and they toss them into the fireplace, but there's still blood all over the couch. Kenneth said that it was here, after Sunday was for sure dead, that Herman Evans called him, and Herman just simply asked Kenneth to come over and help him move some boxes and some furniture. Once Kenneth arrived at the home, Herman had him help take their living room couch outside. Kenneth said it was covered in something. At the time, he thought maybe someone had spilled something all over it, but now he knows it was blood. But at the time, he didn't know. So they carry the couch outside, and Herman sets it on fire. They walk back inside and back to the back bedroom, and it's here where Kenneth finds out that Herman had killed Sunday. Herman tells Kenneth the whole story as Sunday's body is just laying there on the floor. And then Herman tells Kenneth that he needs him to help hide her body somewhere where she won't be found. Kenneth tells the investigators that he didn't want to help Herman do this, but that he feared if he said no to Herman, that Herman was going to hurt him because now he knew about it. So Herman and Kenneth, they roll up Sunday's body in a sheet, and they carry her out to Herman's car, and then they bring her out here to this wooded area several miles away from their home, where they drive back in through here down into the woods, a couple hundred yards back into the woods, and they take Sunday's body out and just kind of toss her on the ground. Now, Kenneth Tomlinson wanted to bury Sunday, but Herman Evans said no, just leave her out here for the animals to get. So they tossed her out of the car, and they just left Sunday's body laying out here in this remote wooded area. Afterwards, they loaded back up in Herman's car, and they just left and went back to the Evans home. After Kenneth Tomlinson had told investigators all of this, he agreed to bring them out here to the spot where they had tossed her body. Kenneth cooperated 100% with investigators, and it was only because of Kenneth that they knew all the details that they knew, and now they were able to recover Sunday's remains. Later on down the line, prosecutors would actually give Kenneth what they called use immunity, which basically allowed him to testify against the Evans, and nothing he said would be used against him, so he wouldn't be charged with Sunday's murder. As law enforcement comes out here to the scene where Sunday's remains were dumped, at first they noted that the remains were so badly decomposed that they couldn't even tell if the remains were male or female, so they were going to have to send the remains off to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's forensic lab for identification. Now, one of the videos that I received from law enforcement is actually one of the detectives was on a four-wheeler, and they're driving down. They actually go over this bridge here that we're on right now, and you can see them drive back in this path, and they go back to where they found her remains.
This is Special Agent Eric Schwalls. Today's date is Thursday, May 27th, 2010. Time right now is approximately 3:08 p.m. Currently located in Colquitt County, Georgia, on Vickers Bridge. We'll be driving to the location of the decedent.
A short time later, after they recovered her remains, all of the evidence came back from the crime lab, and they confirmed that all the blood-stained items that they found inside of the Evans home, they was all matched to Sunday Blombergh. They 100% confirmed that the remains found out here in this wooded area were 100% identified as Sunday Blombergh, and at this point, law enforcement pretty much had everything they needed. Investigators who had been working on this case, they wasted no time, and once they got all of the evidence back, they immediately went and they picked up Herman and Ruby Evans, and they brought them in for another interview. This interview is different because investigators know everything, like I said, so they lean on them hard, and they get Herman to confess, and he tells them what he did, and that he had dumped the murder weapons in a construction work site. And then they also get Ruby to confess. And before Herman and Ruby left the interview rooms that they were in, Tallahassee police officers had been notified, and it turns out Theo Connolly was already in custody in Tallahassee for domestic violence with Danielle, Sunday's ex-best friend. So Theo was now charged out of Tifton with conspiracy to commit murder. Ultimately, Herman Evans, Theo Connolly, and Kenneth Tomlinson, they all pled guilty to their charges. Herman pled guilty to murder. He got life without parole. Theo pled guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, which means he probably just got out. And Kenneth Tomlinson pled guilty to concealing the death of another, and he was sentenced to 10 years, so he probably just got out as well. Ruby Evans was the only one who chose to take her chances with the jury, and after a short trial and a very short deliberation, Ruby Evans was found guilty by a jury of her peers for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, malice murder, and battery. Ruby was sentenced to life in prison without parole plus 10 years. But the story doesn't end there yet, because in another crazy turn of events, after the sentencing hearing for Ruby Evans, Ruby was the last one to be sentenced, and Sunday's family felt a little bit of closure finally, knowing that she was going to be locked up forever. So about 6 people from Sunday's family, they came back out here to the wooded area where Sunday's body was found, and they wanted to put up a little remembrance tree in her honor. The problem was that the spot where her remains were dumped is actually private property, and for whatever reason, the day of Ruby's sentencing, the owner of the property, I don't know if he was just having a bad day or if he's just a mean person or what, but he found that the Blomberghs were out here on his property trying to plant this remembrance tree in honor of Sunday, and he called the police on Sunday's family. The officers who responded to the trespassing call, they told this guy the whole story and how they just left the courthouse where their daughter's killer was sentenced to life in prison. The officers told him how emotional that they were, and they were just trying to do something special for their daughter, and they begged him to reconsider, but it fell through deaf ears, and the landowner actually followed through and had all 6 members of Sunday's family arrested for trespassing. All 6 members of Sunday's family were arrested and booked into jail on the day of Ruby Evans' sentencing for trespassing. I'm pretty sure that the charges were dropped later on down the line, but only after they went to jail on the day that Sunday's killer was sentenced. It's absolutely crazy. After it was all said and done, Sunday's family had her remains taken down to Tallahassee, Florida, where they had a beautiful service for her and she was laid to rest there. But they're forced to think about that no matter how peaceful all of that was, they knew it was a stark contrast to the horrible nightmare that Sunday went through that April the 22nd at the hands of her own in-laws. It was truly brutal. Now, afterwards, Sunday's family got custody of Isabella, and I seriously doubt that Isabella has seen Ruby or Herman Evans since all of this, and I seriously doubt that she ever will, even though that was the whole point of all of this. Herman and Ruby wanted custody of Isabella, and that's why they killed Sunday. I mean, it's just a crazy story, and like I said, this is absolutely horrible. That is going to do it for this story today from here in Tifton, Georgia, and the murder of Sunday Blombergh. I want to thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you're new here, go down, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell so you get notified every time I upload a video. I will be putting up some of the stuff, not all of it, but some of it, like Kenneth Tomlinson's confession in this, where he broke down and told investigators what happened. I have the polygraph test. I have all that. I'll post that stuff up here on my channel starting tomorrow, and then I will be back again for my next story. Until then, thank you all. I will see you again in the next one. Please, all of you, stay safe and stay healthy. Much love to you all.